Hello and welcome back. In the last lesson we introduced the subject of side effects and we actually added one into our center button. When it transitioned into the active state we registered an event listener with a DOM, and when it transitioned into the inactive state we unregistered the event listener. And that all worked fine, and the main reason it worked fine was because the center button was always present. The app basically created the center button at startup and it was there forevermore. In this lesson we're going to see how problems can arise if that's not the case. If the center button could be removed while the app was running, then we could be left in a state where the event listener had been registered and then the button was withdrawn and the event listener was just sat there hanging and there would be nothing to remove it. So in this lesson we're going to actually do a demonstration and show that happening, and then in the next lesson we'll set about fixing it. So to start with, I'd just like to introduce Boolean operators and what's called lazy evaluation. If I've got something like this, true and true, then JavaScript will evaluate this Boolean expression from left to right. So it'll say, is the first term true? Yes. And then it'll move on. Is the next term true? Yes. And so the entire expression will return true. But if this says false, untrue, then it'll evaluate from left to right. It'll say, is this true? No. And it'll know that the entire expression is therefore not true, and it'll just return false. As far as AND is concerned, if the first term is false, it doesn't carry on and evaluate the second one. So this is particularly important if instead of Boolean literal here, we have something like alert hello. So if I run this application and pop it up, we're expecting it to evaluate this. It's going to say, oh, this is false. There's no point in going any further. So the alert won't appear. And sure enough, it doesn't. But if I change this to true and save it, if I pop it up here, the alert will appear before anything else. So we can use this, and it's frequently used in React programming to control whether components appear or not. So we can say false and center button like this. Now, because this is a JavaScript code, we have to place it in curly braces. But if we now pop up the user interface, we'll see that the button has completely disappeared. And to be clear, what actually happened here was the app started, it rendered the user interface, and the center button was never created. If I change this to true, however, then the center button will be created, and there we can see it now. So we can use this to make the center button appear and disappear if instead of a literal here, we have a Boolean variable. So I'll create a Boolean variable called show. And in fact, I'm going to create it as a React component state. So I'll say const show, and I'll have a setter function for it, set show, equals, and then use state, as we saw in a previous lesson. And I'll initialize this to true, which means when this starts up, the show value will be true and the button will be shown. Now I need to import useState, so I'll just do that. Import useState from React. And well, let's just start this up here. We'll see the button will appear because show should be true. Lovely. So the next thing to do is to toggle this show value on and off. And to do that, I'll just add another button and it'll have an on-click handler. And the on-click handler will switch show on and off. So I've already written that and I'll just paste it in. I'll just put it here. So here we can see there's another button. It says toggle logging button, and actually this function should be set show. And it's calling the setter up here and it's passing it a transformation function. So the transformation function will be given the current state of show, this will be, and it'll return the other state. So it'll go from true to false and false to true. So we should see this working now. If I toggle it, the button disappears, and toggle again, it appears. We can just tidy up the user interface by, instead of it all appearing in the center now, let's just put it at the top, so it's not jiggling around all over the place. There we are, and now the button's appearing and disappearing. So that's the user interface taken care of, but the main point of this lesson is to see the side effects. So let's make the terminal disappear and bring up the development tools. And I'll restart for good measure. So if I click on this button, we can see it's been activated and the listener is added. And indeed, if I now type ASDF, we can see that the keyboard handler is clearly registered. And I'll switch it off and I'll press ASDF. So all's working as per normal. The problem arises if I make this button active, so I've got the keyboard event listener invoked. So ASDF, there we are. And now what happens if I hit this toggle button? So what's now happened is that we called setShow, and that has changed the state of the app component, and so the entire app component has been re-rendered by React. Remember, whenever state changes, React will invoke a re-render of a component. So this entire component has now re-rendered with show set to false. And because show is false, the center button has never been created. However, we were in a state where we activated the event listener. And as far as the DOM's concerned, nothing has changed. We never removed the event listener from the DOM. So as far as the DOM's concerned, there's a function it has to call every time. And if I press, let's say, QWERTY, you can see that the DOM is just doing what we told it to do. So this is clearly a very sorrowful state of affairs. And this is not the sort of code that you would want to release into production. Luckily, React has a very elegant solution to this, which is via its function called useEffect. So I will bring this lesson to a close, and in the next lesson we'll see how to go about managing side effects correctly. So I'll see you there.